Hello everyone. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a simple homemade welding machine using an old broken soldering iron. Now I'm going to take it apart to check the inside and see which parts are still usable. So, what's special about this welding machine? First of all, it's super cost effective. No need to spend money on an expensive machine. Just repurpose items you already have at home. It's cheap and fun, just the way DIY projects should be. Due to long exposure to a humid environment and poor storage, the surface became rusty. Next, I'll carefully unscrew the outer casing, slowly loosening each screw so that the parts don't get damaged. Once the cover is off, I'll be able to see the internal wire more clearly and check whether the electrical connections are still intact, or if any wires are burnt, broken, or need to be replaced. Now I'm going to remove all the internal wiring, taking out each piece carefully so that only the outer shell and the main frame of the soldering iron remain. I'm going to work on the wiring for it now. You should choose a thicker copper core wire to avoid using thin wires, as they can overheat and cause power loss. You can adjust the temperature yourself by changing the wiring or adding a resistor. It's super flexible for small welding tasks. I'll thread the electrical wire through the top part of the soldering iron. Now I'm going to reattach the handle. Since this is a mini welding machine, thick electrical wires aren't necessary. I'll use this type of wire and it will work just fine. The key is to secure the connections and properly insulate the contact points to prevent electrical leakage. It looks like the soldering tip I'm going to use is a bit smaller than the hole in the soldering iron. So I'll need something to insert as a spacer to make it fit securely. I'll take an empty soda, can then cut out a piece of its aluminum shell. I'll trim it down and bend it into shape. Aluminum is lightweight, easy to cut and shape, yet still strong enough to hold parts firmly in place. It also resists rust and corrosion, which makes it durable over time. In this case, the aluminum piece works as a spacer and helps secure the soldering tip tightly, ensuring stable contact when the machine is in use. I need to drill a hole so I can connect the electrical wire. There are different types of screws, some longer and some shorter. The screws on this machine are quite short, so I'll need to add a spacer to make sure everything is tightened securely. Now I'll fit in the first soldering tip, which will be a rivet. I've finished grinding the tip so that it's a little sharper. Sharpening the tip is important because it helps concentrate the heat onto a smaller point, making the soldering process more precise and efficient. Steel rivets are a good choice because they withstand high temperatures. Next, for the second type of soldering tip, I'll use a battery core. I've got quite a few old batteries lying around, perfect for experimenting with this mini soldering setup. Instead of throwing away, I'm going to repurpose the inner core of the battery and turn it into a soldering tip, a clever way to give new life to old materials. I'll carefully extract the inner core from one of this battery. This core is usually made from conductive metal, and its size makes it perfect for precise soldering tasks. Once the casing is removed, I'll trim and shape the core to fit our soldering iron connection. It's a great way to recycle and repurpose parts that would otherwise go to waste. And just like that, we've turned it into a working soldering tip. To complete the wiring, I'll attach an alligator clip to the other end. It makes the connection quick, secure, and easy to detach when needed. I'll add another wire to connect from a negative terminal. This will complete the circuit and allow current to flow properly to the soldering tip. For this wire, I'll attach alligator clips to both ends. That way, it's easy to connect and disconnect from both the power source and the device. Now I'll start working with the rivet tip. For the power source, I'll be using a standard motorcycle battery. It's a 12V lead-acid battery, powerful enough to heat up the soldering tip and stable for small electronics work. This type of battery is easy to find, rechargeable, and delivers consistent current, which makes it perfect for our DIY soldering project. Now it's time to put our DIY soldering tool to the test. I'll begin by trying to solder onto this razor blade, which is thin and metallic, making a good challenge for the tool. When soldering with a rivet tip, it heats up very quickly and reaches a high temperature. You can clearly see the metal glowing slightly and feel the strong heat radiating from it. As soon as it touches the solder, the tin melts instantly and flows smoothly, showing that the rivet conducts heat efficiently and gets hot enough for effective welding. Once it's finished, the razor blade is firmly attached to the soldering tip and holds in place securely. The surface looks neat and even, with the blade aligned straight, so it can conduct heat properly. Overall, the piece feels solid and ready for testing. showing that the homemade setup works as intended. Next, I'll remove the rivet tip and replace it with a battery core. I carefully slide the core into place. Making sure it fits tightly and stays stable inside the holder. Once secured, this new tip is ready for heating and testing, allowing me to compare how well it performs against the rivet tip. The core heats up strongly and transfers that heat directly to the blade. The razor blade quickly reaches high temperature, hot enough to melt solder as soon as it makes contact. This setup gives both wide surface heating from the blade and concentrated heat from the core, making the soldering process fast and effective. Now I'll test it by soldering a broken power cord connection. First, with the heated tip, I apply a little solder to tin the wires before joining them together. As soon as the tip touches, the solder melts smoothly and flows into the joint. Bonding the wires firmly. After cooling, the connection feels solid and secure, restoring the power cord to working condition. Finally, I'll punch a hole into the plastic cover so the soldering tip can fit through neatly. This step also helps keep the tip fixed in place and prevents it from wobbling during use, giving the homemade soldering machine a more solid and finished look. In conclusion, I've successfully repurposed an old broken soldering iron into a simple homemade welding tool. By trying out different tips such as a rivet, a battery core, and even a razor blade, I was able to test how each one performs and see their strengths. The modifications, like adding aluminum spacers and drilling the plastic cover, helped the tool become more stable and practical. Although it a DIY project, the final result works effectively for small repairs, showing that with a bit of creativity and recycling, old materials can be turned into something useful again. Recycling old inner tubes and turning them into unique items that are not only budget-friendly but also eco-friendly. From decorative pieces and fashion accessories to practical household items. With just a bit of skill and imagination, old inner tubes can become the star of your DIY projects. Let's get started and create some truly impressive products together. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting videos. On top of that, I'll also be reusing some broken LED bulbs. Next, let's test these two LED bulbs. I plugged the first one into the socket, and it lights up right away, so it's still working fine. Now, let's try the second one. I connect it to the socket, but nothing happens. It stays completely dark. I give a little shake and notice a faint rattling sound inside, which usually means some parts are loose or damaged. So instead of throwing this broken bulb away, I'm going to repurpose it for a DIY project. Even though it no longer works as a light source, its outer shell and components can still be transformed into something creative and useful. Let's take it apart carefully and see what we can make out of it. First, I carefully remove the plastic cap from the LED bulb. With a little pressure, the cover pops off, revealing the small circuit board and the cluster of tiny LED chips inside. I gently separate the components, making sure not to damage the outer shell, because that's the part I'll be reusing for my DIY project. Now, I move on to drilling into the base and the outer shell of the bulb. I carefully drill a small hole through the metal base, just large enough to pass a wire or a small rod through later. Then, I make another hole on the side of the bulb's plastic shell. Here I have a few old batteries, and I'm going to reuse them for my creative project. Instead of throwing away, I'm going to repurpose the inner core of the battery and turn it into a soldering tip, a clever way to give new life to old materials. Instead of throwing them away, these old batteries can actually be reused to create all kinds of things. With a bit of creativity, they can become part of small DIY gadgets, decorative pieces, or even power simple projects that give them a second life. Now, let's take one of these old batteries apart to see what's inside. I carefully peel off the outer metal casing, then remove the protective layer. Inside, There's a core made of tightly packed materials that can be reused in different ways for DIY projects. By handling it gently, I can extract the useful parts without damaging them. When doing this, it's important to be cautious. Avoid touching any leaky material and always work in a well-ventilated area. Once the casing is removed, I'll trim and shape the core. It's a great way to recycle and repurpose parts that would otherwise go to waste. Next, I'll grind the battery core to shape it into a fine tip. Now that it's been ground to the right shape, and just like that, we've turned it into a working soldering tip. Next, I move on to working with the tire. First, I cut out the valve section and set it aside. Then, I carefully trim away the excess rubber around it to get a clean, separate piece. This way, I'll have a neat valve part that can be reused, while the rest of the tire rubber will be prepared for other creative uses. Now, let's make use of the valve piece. Even though it's just a small part of the tire, it can actually be repurposed in creative ways. To clean the valve, I spray a bit of WD-40 onto it. The solution quickly loosens up any dirt, grease, or rust stuck on the surface. After wiping it down with cloth, the valve looks much cleaner and ready to be reused in my DIY project. After finishing all the preparations, it's time for the assembly step. I take the clean valve and attach it firmly to the base of the light bulb. With a bit of adjustment, the valve fits securely into place, turning the bulb base into a sturdy connector. Next, I thread an electrical wire through the opening. The wire passes smoothly from the bulb's base through the valve, creating a neat channel that will make it easier to connect everything later on. Now I take the battery core and attach it to the valve section. Once secured in place, the valve acts like a holder, while the battery core becomes a power source. Combined together with the wire, this setup can be transformed into a simple DIY welding tool. It won't be as strong as a professional welder, but it's enough for experimenting with small joints and creative projects. To complete the wiring, I'll attach an alligator clip to the other end. It makes the connection quick, secure, and easy to detach when needed. I'll add another wire to connect from the negative terminal. This will complete the circuit and allow current to flow properly through the soldering tip. For this wire, I'll attach alligator clips to both ends. That way, it's easy to connect and disconnect from both the power source and the device. For the power source, I'll be using a standard motorcycle battery. It's a 12V lead-acid battery, powerful enough to heat up the soldering tip and stable for small electronics work. This type of battery is easy to find, rechargeable, and delivers consistent current, which makes it perfect for our DIY soldering project. To test out this DIY welding setup, I start with 2 razor blades. I position them edge to edge, then bring the tip of the wire connected to battery core right to the joint. As the current flows, tiny sparks appear and the metal begins to fuse together. Slowly, the edges of the blade start bonding, showing that this improvised welder can actually work on small pieces of metal. After a short while, the welding is complete. The 2 razor blades are now firmly joined at the edge where the sparks fuse the metal together. The joint isn't perfectly smooth like a professional weld, but it holds tightly enough to prove that this DIY setup can actually bond metal pieces. It's a small but exciting success for this homemade welding experiment. Next, I move on to soldering a piece of wire with tin. I strip off a bit of the insulation to expose the copper core, then bring the wire close to the heated tip. As soon as I touch the solder, it melts and flows smoothly over copper strands, coating them in a shiny layer of tin. This creates a stronger, more reliable connection for future use. Now, I test it further by applying solder directly onto the circuit board inside the bulb I opened earlier. As the tip touches the metal pads, the solder melts and spreads evenly across the surface. It bonds well with the tiny copper traces, showing that this DIY welder is capable not only of fusing larger pieces of metal, but also of handling small, delicate electronic parts. This experiment shows how a few discarded items, an old LED bulb, some used batteries, and a tire valve, can be transformed into a simple DIY welding tool. With it, I was able to fuse 2 razor blades, solder a wire with tin, and even test on the circuit board inside the bulb. Although it doesn't match the power and precision of professional equipment, it proves that with creativity and resourcefulness, even broken or unwanted materials can be given a second life in exciting new ways.